Okay, so Victor, how can we turn the crisis of succession that we heard about into an opportunity for worker ownership and for more diverse ownership in manufacturing?
Well, Tom, thank you, and thanks to the Century Foundation, to UIC, to Andy Stetner for hosting this event. I think it's very important for a lot of people, including the people that Safer Foundation serves. I think the first thing about this is really the awareness and the acceptance of the idea that there is a problem. And so, you know, sometimes we can have blind spots where we don't know that we have a problem. And part of what we're doing, the coalition of Manufacturing Renaissance, Safer Foundation, Chicago Federation of Labor, LIST Chicago, World Business Chicago, we are collectively, first of all, trying to raise the awareness of the fact that there is a problem. There is a generational change that's underway. It's been underway for a while, and it will continue. And as we talk about jobs and we talk about economic development, it seems that the first order of business ought to be to keep the jobs and the businesses that we have. And so we have businesses, they're hidden in plain sight. These are manufacturing companies that may have less than 100 employees. We drive by them all the time in these buildings that don't have any windows, and they're behind a gate, and they're in communities. Alderman Moore, there are a number of them in your community. They're right there, and we don't realize that behind those walls are profitable businesses, are businesses that have jobs that pay maybe an average wage of $30 an hour, with benefits, there are career opportunities, and it's right there in sight. And if we don't do something, we will not only lose those businesses and the multiplier effect that those businesses have on our economy, but we will lose those jobs. And so the first thing is awareness, understanding that there is a problem. But secondly, understanding that with this problem, there is an opportunity also. That generational change that's happening in our country presents an opportunity for minorities to get into ownership in businesses, for employee ownership, which is a method of distribution of wealth. Also, there's an opportunity to, as the employees in these businesses also retire, there's an opportunity for people to get into these really good, solid jobs and career opportunities. So the project that we're working on is basically designed to, first of all, we have a study that's done by UIC Great Cities Institute that really seeks to quantify the problem and put the data and the facts out there. And then we're putting forward a recommendation of a solution that involves an entity that's designed to ensure that these viable companies and jobs are not lost, and seize this opportunity to build diversity in ownership, diversity in employment, and wealth creation. So that's what we're working towards.
Thank you. Wanted to ask then, Patrick Osborne is with us, and Patrick is the Vice President of Training and Education, Technology and Manufacturing for the Manufacturing Association here. Patrick, what do your members need to retain and regrow manufacturing jobs in the Chicago region? And how important are apprenticeship and OJT and other educational and training programs to your ability for those companies to survive?
Thank you, Tom. We are TMA, the Technology and Manufacturing Association, located in Schaumburg, Illinois, formerly the Tool and Die Institute. And we represent 800 to 1,000 local small to medium-sized manufacturing companies in the greater Chicagoland area. We're fairly unique in our position in that, like I said, we have 800 manufacturing members, 200 affiliate members, but collectively we represent maybe 23,000 lives working in these manufacturing companies. And I think the biggest problem that my manufacturing companies members need on a daily basis is obviously a skilled workforce. But, I think we all hear that, we all know that, we all talk about that. We're tired of hearing about that. Okay, a skilled workforce. And, how do we address that? What do we need to do? TMA, from an educational standpoint, we've been around since 1925. We're a storied manufacturing association, and we have a world-renowned apprenticeship program. I've been with TMA for about 6 years, and 6 years ago, when I came on board, our renowned program had ground to a halt. We had nobody in the program. Prior to that, we used to graduate 400 apprentice candidates every year in local manufacturing companies through the TMA apprentice program, which is Department of Labor, Bureau of Apprenticeship Training certified. And the point I'm trying to make here is that we used to graduate 400, offshoring, all the problems that came on board with that, and downsizing, and all the problems that manufacturers face is that, the skilled workforce went away. We see it locally, especially in the high schools and the community colleges, where they had career and tech ed programs, they had shop programs, and that all went away. And then, so all of a sudden, all of our members are faced with this skills gap, this shortage, that there's nobody left coming in there. And if you walk into any local manufacturing company, the joke out there is that it's a gray tsunami. And you look around, and everybody in the tool room has gray hair, 55, 60, getting ready to consider retirement, are actually walking out the door, and there's a huge gap in between them and the next generation coming up because of what happened in the 80s and the 90s. We're seeing a small resurgence locally, especially at the high school level. The community colleges are doing their bit too. We at the Trade Association, for the longest time, didn't have any problems because we train incumbent workers. So my manufacturing members never had a problem because they'd work with their local high school, and they get students coming out that didn't want to go to college immediately, maybe didn't want to go at all, couldn't afford to go, whatever the reasons, there was an alternate career pathway for them, and that pathway was manufacturing. You don't need a college degree to come into a career in manufacturing, and we still say that today, and it was wonderful for them back in the day. Things have changed. Our program is back up and running. We now have 150 students back in the program, and we just graduated 51 of them last year in disciplines that include tool and die, mold making, and advanced CNC program. Everything's wonderful again with the 150 students, but they struggle on a daily basis with trying to fill that pipeline. Who's coming in? They're putting ads out on Craigslist. It's a word of mouth, it's a referral. And to be quite honest, they've literally given up. That's what they've told me. They've literally given up trying to recruit young people to come into manufacturing. So we have a very unique scenario at TMA in that we used to teach just the theory of tool and die, mold making, machining, and students, incumbent workers, would get the 10,000 hours of on-the-job training, which makes it an apprenticeship program at their employer. And it was a wonderful program. So what do we do to fill that skills gap, and what are we working on lately at TMA? Like I said, we were based on just theory training. Now we have $1 million CNC lab out in Schaumburg, and we train our incumbent workers at nighttime. Wonderful. They've got access to state-of-the-art equipment. We have a bench of 25, 30 instructors, minimum of 15 years of industry experience, and we teach the gold standard in apprenticeship training, but we still have a hard time getting people educated and knowledgeable about apprenticeship training, about the skills gap, and about these careers that they can just literally walk into, show up on time, as Colin Cosgrove had mentioned, and within 6 months be promoted to the next position, and then hopefully into an apprenticeship role and come to TMA for 3 years. But as we look around TMA during the day, our machine shop, our lab, our state-of-the-art lab sits idle. And it's like, wow, what do we do with this? And it's almost a shame to have all this great equipment, all these great instructors, the curriculum that we spend, countless hours developing. And so we've been almost forced into a different alternate career pathway that still runs parallel to manufacturing and everything we do in the apprenticeship track. But, we're a NIMS certified training facility. I sit on the NIMS board. NIMS is important to everything we do. And like I said, we have all the tools, but we didn't have the bodies coming in. Wonderful scenario with some workforce development partners presented itself to TMA. Bethel New Life, and we have Ed Coleman from Bethel New Life in the west side of Chicago here in attendance today. Victor over here from Safer, we've partnered with them. The Housing Authority of Cook County. We take their students and we take them and we train them. We train them at a really high level that's created by industry for industry, and they get 2 NIMS credentials from us and also a really important piece of paper that's a TMA certificate of completion. So within 16 to 19 weeks, these individuals are now armed with the tools that they need to go into our manufacturing facilities and get that entry-level job into manufacturing. And it's proven to be a wonderful, wonderful thing. The stories we hear about the individuals who graduate from that program, who go on to that first job, who promote themselves, internally. And my end goal is to see them coming back into an apprenticeship program, because as we all know, apprenticeship is the next greatest thing. And not that it ever was, not the next greatest thing, but it's coming back again, and it's coming back strong. So TMA apprenticeship program, workforce development training, and we've just started a new venture, again, to go even a little bit younger, and that's a partnership with a local area high school, Ridgewood High School in Norridge, Illinois, right on the outskirts of Chicago, and they approached us and said, we can't afford to put $1 million of equipment into our school. We're landlocked, we don't want to pour concrete, don't want to buy the equipment, don't have the money for it, and then most importantly, they can't find an instructor to teach that program. So what can you do for us, TMA? Give us your students, bust them out to us, which they've been doing. I'm up to cohort number 3 right now, and we've got about 25 people who've graduated from that program. But the success from that program has stemmed from the fact that they identified locally within the community, heavily Polish, a lot of students not going to college for whatever reason that we've talked about, autodidactic, like to work with their hands, like to build things, use their minds, use their hands, but they didn't know about it. There's a huge, huge, huge problem in the schools that the counselor, I'm not blaming the counselors, but it's the parents, everybody has a role in this, that there's no knowledge out there about the careers that are available to individuals in manufacturing, entry-level careers. And I'll wrap this up real quick. First cohort, we had 10 students come through that program, hooked them up with a local manufacturer across the street, which was important because not all high school students drive. They got an internship opportunity. From that internship opportunity, full-time jobs were offered, and that's an amazing thing. Right. But it's the best kept secret out there. We have a hard time getting the word out there, so it's great for me to be able to tell everybody here that.
Thank you. That's exciting stuff. Lizabeth, I'm impressed with the mission of UI Labs, and especially the focus on solving the problems of our cities. So can you talk about NDDMI's work at UI Labs and what you're doing to make sure that workers have a role in the manufacturing of tomorrow?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. We're excited to be a part of this discussion today. UI Labs is a relatively new organization, just a few years old, based here in Chicago on Goose Island. And I am our Director of Membership Engagement for what is called DMDII. That stands for the Digital Manufacturing and Design Innovation Institute. It is part of the UI Labs program. We are focused on equipping U.S. manufacturers with the digital tools and expertise they need to be successful. We do that through a partnership with the Department of Defense and, as was mentioned, UI Labs. We recognize that in addition to the advanced technologies that need to be developed, there's an important role that needs to be played in helping workers, and we appreciate that we've been able to be a part of this discussion as such a new organization to this space. We have a network of over 300 industry and academic partners that we work with on a regular basis, and we've worked closely with them to develop a few new workforce development initiatives. I want to talk just about a few of those real quickly. The first is a jobs taxonomy. This was something we developed in partnership with Manpower Group, and it's a skills classification that we've done to pull together what we believe are the skills and roles of manufacturing jobs of the future. We've identified 165 different roles and the skills that go with them that we believe manufacturers will need to have to remain competitive. That's actually something that we just rolled out in August, but we've already got our industry partners telling us that they're using it for their own internal hiring needs. Another item that we've recently started, and it's just a year old now, is a digital manufacturing bootcamp online course series. So it's a digital manufacturing 101 course series, again through a partnership with Coursera and the University of Buffalo. It's part of a MOOC, a massive open online course, so open to anyone. And it's a 10-part series to help folks get the skills and needed to start to understand what does it mean to work in digital manufacturing, what do I need to know if I want to pursue this career. But the last thing that we're doing, and it's more general than these two initiatives, but I think it's something that's been touched on many times today, is awareness building. We have the benefit of such a strong network of partners, and how do we work with them to build awareness around the opportunities and what what a manufacturing job looks like in the future. I think it was said several times today, if you can't see it, you can't be it. We're here to try and help make those ideas tangible. We have a 28,000 square foot manufacturing floor in our facility on Goose Island, and we hold monthly workshops where we bring groups in, industry and academic, to go through a workshop, test out what we've got going on the floor. We call them our digital disruption workshops. What does it mean to implement digital technologies into a manufacturing process? And what are the opportunities that that provides for the manufacturer and their employees? So we're just getting started as a relatively young organization in this space, which is why I do appreciate the opportunity to be here today. But we think we have a couple of things underway already that we're pretty excited about.
Thanks. And second to last speaker is Richard Wallace at Jobs to Move America. So first I just want to comment that I'm totally impressed with JMA for its national work and its hard-fought victories in cities around the country to win factories, to bring back companies, bring back productive work. So could you tell us how you guys leverage public procurement to retain and restore and rebuild manufacturing factories for Chicago?
All right. So hello, everybody. My name is Richard Wallace. I'm a Chicagoan, and I'm also the Illinois campaign director for Jobs to Move America. And what we do at Jobs to Move America is we basically harness the power of public agency procurement to develop inroads and new possibilities for disadvantaged workers and bring back and revitalize manufacturing. One of the key victories in the city of Chicago was $1.6 billion procurement through the Chicago Transit Agency, and the development of, it was called the CTA 7000 Series Award. And it was awarded to a company called CRRC Sifong out of China. What we do is we use a tool, it's called the U.S. Employment Plan, which was vetted by, it's another one of Obama's echoes through labor, Obama's Department of Transportation. In that U.S. Employment Plan, we're able to implement that in the RFP process. So when the actual bidding, so at the point of contract, there are already agreements around disadvantaged workers, around facility credits, around ensuring that women and post-incarcerated folks have access to employment. And those are the outcomes that are derivatives of our engagement, right? With CRRC, there's a factory that's being built in the southeast side of Chicago. It's going to employ 175 workers, possibly more. We'll be producing rail cars. It'll be the first time that rail cars will be produced in the city of Chicago since in the last 40 years, right? So we're bringing back the Pullman area, right? Which is, as an African-American man, I think that's extremely important. There's a rich history around the Pullman porters and our community. So that's what we're doing right now. And essentially, we've done this same exact process with implementing the U.S. Employment Plan in Atlanta, Denver, New York, LA, on the level of transit purchases, bus purchases, et cetera. And in that way, we're able to bring back manufacturing in ways that ultimately increases the agency of the taxpayers, right? It's about reclaiming democracy in a very real way, right? Taxpayers, we pay into the tax base, but we really don't have much of a say on the outcomes. This allows for community representatives to actually have a seat at the table. In addition, there's nuances available just by the formation of a coalition. We have a very strong coalition in the city of Chicago. The CFL being a very key partner in this process, along with IBEW, SMART. And then we have like extremely radical groups like the Workers Center for Racial Justice and ASE, and and then we have environmental groups like Sierra Club and Jobs with Justice. And we're all working together, which is something I think is essential to really harnessing the power to really create the changes necessary for our communities, right? So we have this very robust coalition that supports our efforts, and we build these campaigns together collectively to win. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great work. So Tony Garcia is with us from the United Auto Workers, and Tony, I know that many of the topics we're covering today, we're talking about industry and we're talking about supply chains, and if it wasn't for the UAW, we would not have had our auto industry still intact. So you guys were part of the AutoZar program to save the auto industry and to move it toward more efficient vehicles. And we know also that that workers' capital is being invested in auto industry platforms around the country. And we just heard in Cleveland and Pittsburgh from Ted Chandler from the Housing Investment Trust, which is an organized labor housing trust that's been around for about 50 years, that that trust is now dedicating $1.2 billion to reinvest in 9 Midwest cities across the heartland. And furthermore, they're investing in small auto shops. So they made an investment in Detroit Manufacturing Systems, which is an auto worker facility owned by a woman, a minority-owned company. So those are all great stories, and wanted to get your view on how do we rebuild America and rebuild our industry.
Well, thank you. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me, and this is a great crowd. In fact, I bet you half the people in this room didn't know the other half existed, so this is a good format, and it's great. And thank you, by the way, for changing the format so I didn't have to read my 50-page manifesto. So anyway, so some of the things we do and with UAW, and especially our larger employers, you know, we have a manufacturing assembly plant on the southeast side of Chicago. And part of that is the partnership we have with the UAW has with Ford Motor Company. Right. I can speak to just about everybody on the panel and some of the other people that have been in the room. You know, Jobs to Move America, we were at that table. And again, just like Richard said, there were some diverse groups, you know, and I actually sat on the board of ASE for a while and some of the environmental groups and things like that. But they brought these people together at the table and he says, we're going to get this done. And frankly, got it done. So it's a factory on the southeast side that's going to be a union factory. They're going to pay us scale wages and things. So they made a commitment to say, we're going to build rail cars for the CTA in the city of Chicago, and that's what needs to happen. And to Patrick's point, you know, this whole thing is so multifaceted, right? We're talking about apprenticeships and education and training and things like that, but we're missing the transportation piece too. You know, you have to, I've heard, you know, Tammy Duckworth invited us one time to a industrial, a small, just probably like the things that Patrick represents. But, you know, and I was the skunk at the picnic. I was the only union guy there. But somebody piped up and it says, well, we can't get the people from the south side and the west side to the jobs up in Schaumburg that need the jobs. So we need to make that connection. And I think maybe that you know, that's not a bridge too far. We need to do things like this. We need to invest in infrastructure. And we have to leverage the political power in this room to say what the things that the manufacturing renaissance are doing. I think their model is an outstanding model. And one of the guys stood up and said that we need to support that. Well, we did. We were in Springfield at that time. We did some lobbying, Alice Palmer and David Robinson. And we did help get that through the House. But what was more impactful than that was the young man, Torres. Is he here? I saw him. There he is. There he is. So we're sitting at a dais. We invited them to come and present to our members, over 150 members, something like that. Torres got up there, and you could see he was scared to death. You know, it was the first time he had ever spoken in front of a crowd, and he's shaking and things. But you could hear a pin drop when he spoke, and I'd like to see more of that in a room like this, right? People like Torres and some of the people that are impacted in a positive way, right? So, and honestly, with that partnership with Ford Motor Company, we were able to convince or coax Ford Motor Company to provide some seed money for the manufacturing renaissance. In fact, they've got a program at Bowen High School, and frankly, when we were approached, that's my alma mater. I went to Bowen High School. Cool. I said we agreed to give the money as long as they named the Tony Garcia wing for this manufacturers. But great. There's a lot of people in this room that are doing wonderful, wonderful things. And again, I think we need to keep this connection because there are a lot of resources here. And people need these jobs, and Patrick probably needs people to fill these jobs. So I think we should make this connection. It shouldn't be a one and done, and let's be done with it today, and we need to move forward as a group. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we're back on track in terms of time. I've got one more question, but also if you want to start queuing up for questions, go ahead and raise your hand so we can get your questions lined up. But I wanted to ask all the panelists. So we're taking this roadshow back to Washington D.C. And we want to send a strong message to Congress and the White House, as well as governors and state legislators around the country. What can government do and what should it do to help us rebuild America? You want to start? Anyone? Victor?
Well, I think that we have a situation in our country where we have a 3.8% unemployment rate, yet we have 6.7 million open jobs in the country. We still have double-digit unemployment in certain communities, not just in urban areas, but some rural areas as well. We have 70 to 100 million people in our country with criminal records, and many of them are out of the workforce. Right. They are sitting on the sidelines. I never thought I would see the day when Crane Chicago Business would put on the front page of their newspaper that hiring people with records is the new diversity.
Good.
We have bankers that are talking about the fact that if we don't find a way to get people off the sidelines and into the workforce, in 2 or 3 years, we're going to be in a recession. In Chicago, we have 20% of the population has been in poverty for more than 20 years. And here we have this huge opportunity where there are jobs available. There are 50 million people expected to retire in the next decade. Right. And then we have millions of people who don't have jobs. And so, you know, it's an incredible opportunity. We have to get government to do everything in their power to focus on this problem and opportunity, to marshal the resources and focus that on these communities where this is the perfect opportunity to uplift these communities. And it takes everyone. Government can be the convener of industry, of nonprofits, of education, of business, to pull this together and make it happen. It will be a huge failure and waste of opportunity if government doesn't step up at all levels to try to facilitate this happening.
Right.
I think we need to direct government to stop encouraging this whipsaw effect where large corporations whipsaw states and communities against one another to gain this, you know, to cut the ribbon, and then you never pay that back. Right. So we talk about revenue, and you know, you can spend that money on the very programs we're talking about here. We can have the trainings and the apprenticeships and things like that, rather than, that's not an investment. That's just kind of a tax give back. And I know that I say that with a grain of salt because I represent, you know, people that work at Ford and Caterpillar and places like that that have been beneficiary of that, you know, so I'll probably lose my job after today, but go ahead.
I think it's interesting. I mean, the obvious thing for me to say is funding. You know, funding, you know, we think it solves all problems, but, you know, I look at our small to medium-sized manufacturers and, you know, they pony up and they pay for the training. Our workforce development partners pony up, they stand up and they pay for it. And that's why I think it's not always a funding issue. But for me, you know, when we talk about government, and to me, it's an awareness problem. And I think, you know, if government gets involved, and I know that they have, and they talked about apprenticeship training, but I think when they say apprenticeship, you know, it falls on deaf ears. It's not landing on the ears of the young people and the parents and the schools to be able to educate the younger folks that there's opportunities there for careers in manufacturing. So I just think more of a national awareness program about the opportunities for careers in manufacturing would not just help me locally and, you know, stateside here in Illinois, but also, you know, throughout the entire country.
Elizabeth?
So I would piggyback on what Patrick said.
A little bit, can we? Great. I think that one of the biggest areas we see for opportunity when we think about it, we are part of a national institute that receives seed funding from the government. As I mentioned, we're a partnership with the Department of Defense. But one of the areas that we're really still grasping to grow is in the space of training and apprenticeships. And we do believe that we have a number of great opportunities, but we need to find people who are able to pay for those opportunities. And so most of the companies we work with are small and mid-sized manufacturers who do not have the time or the resources to devote to this kind of thing because they are busy trying to keep their businesses running. So we'd like to be able to help, but I think that both the awareness piece, as Patrick said, and funding for training and apprenticeships at organizations like TMA and UI Labs would be really helpful.
All right. So in my dream world, it would be, support the ban. I mean, to remove the federal ban on local hire. I think that's a big barrier. And another piece would be to support the fight against right to work. We need union jobs. And that's my dream world, right? On a more practical level, it is supporting the investment in infrastructure and bus, rail, so that we're competitive with the other countries, right?
Yep.
There's ample room for investment in infrastructure around bus and rail manufacturing, and I would definitely ask to double down on investment there.
So questions from the audience?
Good afternoon. I've lived on the west side, Humble Park area, East Garfield Park area, and the biggest thing that comes to my mind with all this wonderful information, sitting under the leadership of Dr. Cordova, is the trust. When do you tell the community we mean this, and what do you do to let them know that you're serious about such a wonderful thought? We have been promised a lot and given a little. So what can you do to make the community know this is what we are offering you and this is what we can do for you?
Anyone want to take that?
Well, I'll take it from our perspective. We work primarily with people with arrest and conviction records. And we try to do quite a bit of outreach to make people aware of the fact that there are training opportunities and funds available so they can be trained and pursue these kind of opportunities, as well as having job retention people and job developers that are working with employers to make the connections with the employers. I do think, awareness of the fact that these opportunities are there is very important. We are trying now to fund some community outreach people who will go out in the community and make people aware of what those opportunities are. We do have issues with transportation because a lot of the jobs are not easily accessible. That is a real problem. Even sending our folks to TMA, I mean, they're going all the way out to Arlington Heights to get training. So that becomes an issue. But I do think awareness is one thing. We do also, our legislators, I think, have to really hold accountable the businesses that they're supporting through tax incentives and other kinds of incentives to really deliver on the promises they make to the community to get those incentives. And it's going to take a much more forceful attitude and approach on the part of our legislators to demand it, and then there needs to be consequences if they don't deliver. We have proposed that here in Chicago and other parts of government, there needs to be a chief equity officer. There needs to be an office of inclusion, equity inclusion. They need to have the ability to do independent analysis of projects, looking at the potential it has to uplift communities and building in consequences before we make investments or give permission for these things to happen, consequences if they don't deliver on what they promise. We need that kind of function to hold accountable the organizations that are promising things to our communities and then they never deliver.
Thank you. Another question?
Again, Tom Decker, Chicago Green Insulation. First of all, I want to say thank you to the panel and for everybody organizing this. Victor, thank you for taking action very rapidly and got a meeting as a direct result of things you've already done today. I wanted to follow up with what spray foam insulation connects to all of this, because as a manufacturer and a small manufacturer, what we're able to create within the polyurethane foam training is 500,000 manufacturing union and non-union jobs nationwide. And so what I wanted to ask is, mirroring what Erica Swinney was saying before, what are each of you doing today, or what will you be doing this afternoon or tomorrow to build that direct personal relationship with somebody rather than embracing it as a marketing program to solve these issues?
So one of you volunteer for that, and then we'll take the last question we're getting close to. So, anyone?
I would just like to mention that as a small to medium-sized manufacturing association company with 800 members, we're out there. We're boots on street. We're in Chicago. We're in the suburbs, by O'Hare. We talk to our manufacturing members daily. We're a small staff of probably 20 people, but a big portion of that, we're training and education. There's a membership team. There's outreach, government relations. We are constantly talking to our members, analyzing their needs, and we bring it all back, and we try and create training programs specifically to fit that one manufacturer. If it's stamping, if it's tool and die, if it's machining, if it's Swiss machining, if it's 5-axis machining, whatever it is, we listen, we hear, and we feel like we have the capabilities to be able to turn and to create a curriculum, to get that instructor, and to provide that training situation for them. It may only be 1 or 2 people in that class, but that's what that's the benefit of a small trade association, is that we can do for them what they need.
Another question. This lady right here, this gentle lady.
Thank you.
This grand gentle lady.
Thank you, panel. Victor, if I might call you that, you raise an interesting area that should be looked into further, and that is to do some analysis of how revenues are being spent. I was the ranking member of the Revenue Committee when Pate Phillip was the president of the Senate, but I convinced him that he should send me to a conference of revenue members. And at the conference, and I mentioned earlier, I'm from Hoosierville, the main speaker was a Republican chairman of the Revenue Committee in Indiana. So I bearded him, and I said, what do you think of TIFs? He said, I'm a businessman. A TIF is a contract, so that when we sit down, we negotiate. I, as government, will give you a certain length of time and a certain amount of money. You, as the recipient, will tell us what it is you will do with that money. I will give you 10 years. At the end of that 10 years, we will sit down together and see if you have lived up to your end and if we have lived up to ours. I don't find that going on when it comes to TIFs. And I think that we need to arm ourselves and become very knowledgeable about these streams of revenue. Right here at this institution, in great cities, there was Rob Mayer, who was under Harold Washington, and he raised the idea of linked development, which means we don't want to stop downtown from being built, but for every downtown building, there should be a percentage of the money that is used for that should go into developing a community, a residential west side community, as Chris mentioned, and north side, south, and so forth. I think we need to revisit these and be serious about, when I said Frederick Douglass and nothing gives if you don't make a demand. We have to make some concrete demands in such manner. And I'm sure there are other ways that other things we can look at. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Eddie Cornigan. I'm the Dean of Continuing Ed and Professional Development at the Joseph Business School and Director of Prison Ministries at Living Word Christian Center. We do partner with SAFER, and thank you for your partnership, Victor. A lot of these are new relationships that I see emerging. course, though, with Manufacturing Renaissance, we do have a relationship with them as well. But here's what I have a question about. And Victor, you raised this, you were the first person to bring up the word of poverty. I hadn't heard that amongst all of the panels today. And then when we talk about inclusion and the breadth of the meaning of inclusion, should we begin to broaden that conversation, meaning that there's a particular level or size to the silo that brings resources down to the community, and there are a lot of people left out to the left or to the right of that, but how do we broaden that to bring them in? And that would lead us not to be thinking about inclusion so much, and even around this room, not thinking about just as a particular industry, but thinking about this as an ecosystem, and also thinking about disruption. Because what I've heard all today is about disruption. It's not about inclusion, but about disruption. And I just wanted to know, what do you think about that?
Richard, you want to take that?
So I think one of the things that I learned the most in my tenure at JMA is we have to learn the language of procurement, right? The language of the money, right? And that was key for me, is that I hadn't learned, and all of my organizing, I've done a lot of organizing in the city of Chicago, I had not learned how to get ahead of the 8 ball. And through learning the procurement language, we see how, which is basically how our tax dollars are spent, right? How our money goes out to the market and then is bid on, right? But that knowledge is not widely disseminated, right? So we need to have more conversations about where our tax dollars are going. As an African American, right, we invest $500 billion annually into the market, right, via our tax dollars, right? We need to learn how that money is being spent, who's bidding on that money, who's winning the awards, and actually begin engaging with those companies, saying these are our demands as a community if you're going to do business here, right? Those are things that we can begin to think about once we learn the process that I think is definitely hidden in a lot of ways behind very metal language like procurement, right? The average person is like, what is this you're talking about? What is procurement, right? Like, so we have to learn that language and begin to build policy, build campaigns, build strategy around the learned knowledge that we gain from understanding that language, right? And get ahead of the procurement, ahead of the 8 ball. Before they say they're gonna build A, B, and C, we know that it's going to happen, and we already got our bid in. You know, those are the things that I think about.
Can I make a comment?
Sure.
You know, to me, it seems like, you know, we keep trying to solve the same problem in the same way. And at some point, you have to say that something has to change. Because we've been trying to do set-asides and procurement stuff and all of that. I'm not saying we stop doing that. But the problems, they haven't changed in decades with all of those things. And part of it, to me, is that we have an economic system that works in a certain way. And unless you build in certain things to safeguard people, the same market forces take over and you get the same result. Even if you do a set-aside, some small group of people benefits and the masses of people are still left out in the cold. So what are we going to do differently that ensures that the people who need it the most get a chance to participate in our economy? What are we going to do differently? I mean, you know, because we've been talking about this stuff for decades and nothing has changed. So, for example, you know, employee ownership of companies is an opportunity to distribute wealth. Right. It doesn't mean that they're not participating. They're still in the capitalist market, in the capitalist system, competing for business with other companies. But at least when the owners, if there's a decision about we're going to pick up this company and move it to another state, that the employees have to make that decision, not one person, one family, one group of investors. It changes the dynamic, and we've got to do something, things like that, to change the way the economy works so it works more favorably for more people.
Questions?
I want to piggyback on what he said, because in LA, at our LA Metro, we introduced what we call a construction careers policy. In that, there was a development of carve-outs and project labor agreements specifically for disadvantaged workers, right? So when the project labor agreement is, so what happens in general, if we want to get honest about some of these processes, right, is that there'll be an apprenticeship or pre-apprenticeship program or a training program that essentially may last longer than the jobs will, right?
Right.
Right? So what happens is we have on the front end, we front load the contract, right? This construction careers policy with carve-outs and the project labor agreements for what we consider like express roads for marginalized workers to get advanced, right? Because you're also talking about tenure, right? People that have been in these fields or in these unions for a long period of time, right? So how do we get people from point A to point B, right? Without creating fast tracks, right? Through innovation and learning the language, right? And through that process, we can create carve-outs and project labor agreements, right? To ensure that our people or our people in the communities that we serve have fast tracks into those jobs, and then also wraparound services for trainings that address the whole individual, right? Which means buses, transportation to and from training, et cetera. So there's more that we can talk about on that.
Good stuff. Question back here.
Hi, my name's Nidra Fierce. I'm with the Greater Chatham Initiative. We serve, we're an economic development entity that serves communities on the south side. And so earlier, one of you said that you were going to address the Illinois Opportunity Fund because we have found that tax incentives do work. They do attract manufacturers. They help bring manufacturers to the community. They help keep the manufacturers in the community. And so I just wanted this panel to address the new Illinois Opportunity Fund.
Does anyone have information on that?
No, I thought that was the treasurer. Did the treasurer mention that?
They might have, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
That might have been the treasurer that talked about that. Oh, he didn't?
Opportunity in the new tax law, which is a different,
Yeah, that's
component
right.
that was more flexible than the existing new markets tax credit, which was very narrow. This is hopefully going to be a new tool. We'll see how it goes.
Right.
Tested.
Okay. Questions? Are we running out of questions? Question over here, this gentleman.
I'm Reverend Anthony Haynes, the chairman of the Ministers for Manufacturing. There was a question that came up about how do you get the word out, like the west side, the south side, the other places like that. And what we at the Ministers of Manufacturing are doing are using the power of the pulpit and the boots on the ground to get the word out in the community. And right now we have a total of about 50 pastors and about 40,000 congregants that are involved in what we're doing. And we're going across the state to gather more pastors and more people to get the word out about the work that's being done for manufacturing so that we can feed into the workforce line for the training in order to get into the manufacturing companies. And so this is good information, and we will keep the word going forward and also work towards the legislation being passed in Springfield to see that there's funding. And we also will encourage companies, because even some of our congregations rather have some wealthy members that have businesses too that can pitch into this kind of thing. So there's a lot of things that we can do, and we're looking forward to working with any of you that want to work with us. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we've come to the end of this panel. I want to thank all the panelists. I believe, Brad, you're going to be getting up pretty soon, right?
As soon as you say okay.
So I'll just say, to wrap up, my sense in terms of what we should be talking to our leadership about is our leadership needs to look to the leadership of Europe, where the European Union has created industrial policies. And they talk about investments in the broader industrial commons. And in those investments, they're bringing back manufacturing, they're innovating new industries, they're driving innovation, economic growth, and they're capturing the jobs from those supply chains and value chains. So those are the kinds of things we should be thinking about. We haven't been able to use those words for a long time. It's time to use them again. So thank the panel, and thanks a lot for coming.